My name is Rhea Calder, 44 years old. The glass clicked the microphone once, twice, and my father smiled the way a practiced host smiles when he wants the room to relax on his cue. "She's my greatest disappointment," he said, and the laughter that followed slid over the tables like a sheet being pulled up to cover a body. It wasn't cruel, it was relieved. People prefer a joke to a truth. Eyes tilted toward me and away again. 100 tiny verdicts delivered under chandelier light. Someone squeezed my shoulder with store-bought pity. I didn't flex, didn't flinch. I set my napkin down, smoothed the crease, and tasted sugar from a lemon ice cake I hadn't cut yet. Then the world outside shifted. Beyond the country club's French doors, a low thrum came on like weather. Rotors carved the night, silverware rattled, table runners lifted like white flags. The band overshot 2 beats before stopping, and even that failure sounded polite. The air changed temperature. The photographer forgot to breathe. When the doors blew open, wind marched through the room and turned linen into seabirds. A SEAL captain stepped in, boots heavy on parquet my father had insisted on renting, because Oak says we made it. He didn't scan the crowd. He found me and held there. "Admiral," he said, voice steady over the chop of blades, "the president needs you now." Someone at table 7 whispered, "Admiral?" Like a wrong note had slipped into a familiar song. Across the room, my father's smile flatlined. My mother's hand found his sleeve without leaving dents, the reflex older than any toast. I didn't stand immediately. I let the word land, let it echo off the framed photos lining the back wall, wedding day, toddlers in matching red sweaters, a boy with a paper crown blowing out candles that didn't matter anymore. The microphone in my father's hand hissed. For a half second, the feedback sounded like a small animal in pain. "I'll need 2 minutes," I told the captain. "You've got one," he said. "Then I'll take one," I replied, not unkind. I walked the length of the dance floor, heels clicking through a field my father had engineered to project success. He refused to meet my eyes, studying bubbles in his flute as though carbonation required supervision. Up close, the champagne smelled like apples and apologies. I turned the mic away from his mouth. "You're still on," I said. He flinched and cut the sound. Without amplification, his voice lost muscle. "You planned this," he said. Not quite a question, not brave enough to be an accusation. Mom breathed my name under her breath, a handkerchief of a sound. Outside, the lawn glowed. An impossible movie green, where the helicopter's wash pinned the grass flat. Napkins flapped like gulls on a cheap coast. The wind hit me cool and clean, the kind that scrubs you down to what matters. People parted as I moved, not out of reverence, just uncertainty, our oldest reflex. When in doubt, make space. The captain matched my step to the patio doors and offered a headset with the economy of someone who knows that words can get in the way. "Mission brief, tight." I took it, tucked stray hair behind one ear, and slid the foam over my head. His sentences were clean cuts. "Hijacked signal in the Atlantic. Asset in transit without authorization. 3 choke points if we're right, none if we're late." He tapped a folder tucked under his arm. Paper. The last honest technology. I saw the corners creased and knew he'd read it twice. "Why me?" Someone behind me whispered. Maybe Aunt Carol, maybe the boy who'd been running figure eights around the dessert bar, like the answer would be a spectacle they could post before the cake was cleared. I didn't turn. Some answers are not for rooms. They belong to years, to sand and salt and windows that don't open. I had chosen a navy dress tonight, the kind designed to offend no one and reveal nothing. The captain flicked a look at my shoes and then back at the bird. "We've got boots on board," he said. A ghost of a smile admitted the practical absurdity of anniversaries collapsing into operations. "Give me 10 seconds, I said. He nodded and angled away, radioing. I went back inside because ghosts live in doorways, and old stories like to be told where they began. My father stood where I'd left him, jaw set in that practiced clench my childhood had been framed in. Up close, his cufflinks caught the light like tiny, stubborn moons. He lowered the flute. "You made this about you," he said, not whispering, not loud, just tuned to the frequency of humiliation. "I didn't call the helicopter," I said, "and I didn't write your joke." Pride and shame ride the same blood. I watched both pass under his skin. I'll be back if I can, I told my mother. I kissed her cheek, lilac and powder. She squeezed my hand with a strength that surprised us both, a small act of rebellion. Behind us, a man with a kind face and a rented tux took a step like he wanted to offer something, help, a coat, decency, and remembered he didn't know how. Around the room, pity began to rotate toward wonder, not because they loved me, because people love proximity to stories. I didn't know she was... A woman started near the bar and didn't finish. At the edge of my vision, the photographer's hands trembled their way back into work, a reflex returning. Fine. Let them gather images. They'd get the angles wrong, but the wind right. I left the mic on the table. It rolled once and settled, pointing nowhere good. Mom's eyes shone wet and fierce. Dad's narrowed, as though he could calibrate me with enough focus to make me smaller. The captain and I jogged across the lawn that had been manicure-scaped into submission. The crew chief reached down and hauled me into the belly like we'd rehearsed it, because we had in other places, under other chandeliers, the fluorescent kind that buzzed. The door slid. The downwash became harness, headset, clipped verbs. I let the cool metal touch my temple for one beat, not to pray, to mark time. We lifted. The country club fell away, gazebo string lights, the pond with its polite fountain, the tent where they'd planned to stage a second toast. Somewhere down there, a DJ would still get paid. Through the headset, the captain's outline flattened into action. Signal anomaly escalated to breach. Asset 90 minutes east of our intercept line. Secure uplink may lag. He held out the folder. Inside, a thumbnail of a hull, a cutaway of compartments, 3 red circles where the math went bad. I traced a route and felt the click behind my ribs, the clean lit snap when scattered pieces locked a thread. Any casualties? I asked. Negative yet. We both let the words sit there, a thin ice bridge we were choosing to step on. Coronado? I asked, not to make conversation, to learn his water. Bud's 287, he said. Ran cold before they made it safer. Everything's safer when it's colder, I said. He glanced over once and understood more than the sentence said. He hadn't called me by name once, only Admiral. Respect earned is a clean word. It doesn't stick. The bird cut through a river of cloud and into moonlight so clear it felt like a new sheet on an old bed. Below us, the town unwound. High school stadium, pale church steeple, the diner where I'd learned coffee black and wishes small. My phone vibrated in my purse. I didn't look. There are messages you can predict without reading. Come back. You ruined it. How dare you? Or worse, nothing at all. The captain angled a tablet so I could see top-line data crawling like ants. Somewhere a screen was watching my face to make sure it didn't change. It didn't. He said, we rendezvous with a C-37. Sit room in 2 hours. POTUS standing by. He said it like weather. Factual, moving, indifferent to feelings. Copy, I said. There's a thing that happens when you leave a room where people think they own your story and enter a room where what you know matters more than who you are. Your breath evens. Your bones remember. The rotor turns doubt to dust if you let it. In the cabin light, the captain studied me once. For what it's worth, he said, voice pitched low, private. The room looked wrong down there. I pictured the chandelier swaying, the mic rolling, my father's hand hovering over a glass like he could smooth bubbles with willpower. It'll look different when we land, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. The crew chief flashed a thumb. We dipped toward a runway lit like a measured heartbeat. A jet waited, nose pointed east, a compass needle dressed in paint. As the skids kissed tarmac, I let one thought break the surface, a narrow, necessary thing. Shame only works if you agree to wear it. In the country club, they'd draped it over me like a shawl and waited to see if I'd tuck it close. I didn't. Out here, the night smelled like kerosene and salt, and the headset carried a single sentence that hummed with consequence. A signal that shouldn't exist, blinking where darkness can't be afforded. We would move on incomplete truth, and the cost of guessing wrong would be paid by people who didn't even know their names were now part of the math. The door slid back. Wind walked in and took my hair with it. We ran under the rotors toward the waiting jet. The captain's hand brushed the folder once, an old habit of counting tools before a dive. 2 hours to D.C., he said. We'll patch what we can en route. We've done more with less, I said. He nodded. Respect, not reassurance. The jet's stairs lowered, mouth opening to swallow the night's next sentence. I climbed. The country club shrank into a warm box in a cold world. I didn't look back. The story I owed was ahead. When I was 10, the word discipline was not abstract. It was starch, lemon polish, and the exact 45-degree angle of boots beneath the coat tree. Our house smelled like order. My father called it strength. My mother called it Saturday. To me, it was air that sometimes felt too tight to breathe. In the corner of his study hung a shadow box with a bronze star and a purple heart aligned with ruler precision. He called it the altar, with a half-smile that dared anyone to laugh. I never did. You didn't breathe too close to glass like that. You learned silence instead. That December, my father took me to the Army-Navy game in Philadelphia. It was a cold that made your teeth ache, the kind where hot chocolate tasted like medicine. We sat high in the stands, the cadets and midshipmen below marching with that ceremonial seriousness that turns boys into silhouettes of men. Brass hammered the air. The crowd sang fight songs like prayers. My father didn't sing. His eyes narrowed, as if reading the field for weak points. You see that? He said, nodding toward the Navy side, the wave of white covers turning as one. Discipline, tradition, that's what builds men. He punched that last word like I'd missed the point. I could do that, I said, because 10 is made of declarations. He didn't look at me. Leave the uniform to men who can handle it. He handed me his gloves because my fingers had gone red. Care looked like correction in our house. I folded the words small and put them in my pocket. Mom was the soft place. She taught American Lit in cardigans that changed with the seasons, burnt orange when the leaves fell, pale lilac when tulips pushed through dirt. She warmed cocoa in the Dutch oven and slid spare dollar bills into my coat for book fairs. She called me Stormbird, a name borrowed from Dickinson, or maybe her own invention. Wild, fierce, a little too strong for your own good, she said. She meant it as blessing, not indictment, but in our house, even blessings had to pass inspection. At dinner, forks landed softly on china at 1800. Elbows were tactical errors. Feelings were best filed away. When I skinned my knee, Dad tossed an antiseptic wipe and said, "Soldiers don't whine." I wasn't a soldier. I knew it. He knew it. But I learned how to fold pain small, flat as paper, until it could slide unnoticed between books. By middle school, I could iron a shirt to regulation crispness and shine shoes until they could blind. I memorized the crease lines on his dress greens and the names of medals I wasn't allowed to touch. When he left for drills, I'd stand in his study and study the altar as though the ribbons might blink if I looked hard enough. It wasn't hunger for medals. It was hunger for the story of worth they told. Then came 8th grade career day. Guidance lined up parents with clipboards, a dental hygienist, an insurance man, the feed store manager. My father strode in late, wearing his old Class A jacket, fabric tight across a chest that time had thickened. He lectured about duty and national character. Boys sat straighter, girls scribbled notes. Afterward, I asked him one question at dinner. If I wanted to serve, would you help me figure it out? He chewed, set his fork down carefully. That's not how we build families, he said. He didn't mean we. He meant I. So I made my own study plan. Videos of Annapolis parades, push-ups on bedroom carpet with a box fan humming, laps around the block before dawn, the sky pale as notebook paper, shoes drying on the porch rail, towel stiff with early sweat. Mom, who hated secrets, kept this one. Sometimes she met me at the sink and said nothing, just poured water, touched my shoulder, punctuation soft as a comma. Dad's approval became a lighthouse on a coast that kept shifting away. When I made honor roll, he nodded once. When I made varsity cross country, he said, "Run like someone's chasing you." Then he turned back to the news. The chase became fuel. At 16, I asked to iron his dress uniform for a reunion dinner. He watched from the doorway, silence pressed into the lint. When I finished, he ran a hand down the sleeve and gave the smallest lift of his chin, almost a salute. I pocketed it like cash. 2 weeks later, I told him I wanted to apply to the Naval Academy summer seminar. He didn't refuse. He left a folder on my bed instead. Applications for local colleges, nursing programs, teaching certificates. Realistic, he said from the hall, backlit by judgment. Some uniforms didn't belong to me. That's when Mom began slipping clippings into my algebra book. Profiles of female officers. A Marine drill instructor underlined twice. She drove me to the library 2 towns over, where the librarian didn't mind a teenager hoarding Naval Institute proceedings. You could be the calm in the room, Mom said once, when the house was quiet enough for truth. You've got that kind of spine. I didn't know if spines were inherited or grown. I decided to believe both. Junior year, I sent for the Annapolis catalog. Thick, blue, embossed seal like a dare. I traced pages the way other girls touch prom dresses. I filled out practice essays in biology margins, practiced Sir, Ma'am to a mirror that didn't care which one I chose. I wore blisters into calluses on runs no one timed but me. Dad noticed the catalog, didn't comment. His silence had flavors. This was the Arctic kind. When I asked for a recommendation letter, he said, I won't help you fail at something you don't understand. I wrote to my calculus teacher instead. The application became a campaign. Transcripts, medical exams, fitness tests. I failed the first mile time. Cried into a towel that smelled of rubber matting. Ran again that night in rain that erased my face. Passed a week later by 2 seconds. 2 seconds can build a life. During my interview, an old Navy chief asked, "What is leadership?" I didn't quote a book. I said, "It's remembering who needs shade before the parade starts." He smiled. "You'll do," he said, shaking my hand like it held something stable. Months later, spring peeled ice from gutters. Track season began. Mom pressed a lilac postcard into my palm. Something came. We stood on the front steps while I slit the envelope with a butter knife. "We are pleased to offer," my voice cracked, "United States Naval Academy appointment." Mom laughed and cried, both, like a door finally opening. I walked into the kitchen where Dad read the paper, newsprint shielding him like armor. I held out the letter. He scanned it, folded it along the crease, and set it down. "So, you're serious about this nonsense?" He rinsed his coffee cup, set it on the rack at an angle only he cared about. 2 months after, he barely spoke, unless it was logistics, oil changes, curfew perimeters, practical walls in place of words. Silence stacked like bricks. They shaved our heads at Annapolis. Not literally, not for women, but the metaphorical shearing was clean. Identity went out with the trash on induction day. In came starch, sweat, and the sound of someone screaming 1 inch from your nose. Pleb summer was 7 weeks of learning you were always wrong. Step left when you should step right. Blink when you should stare. Speak when you should breathe. The only correct move was to move again, faster, sharper, without hesitation. I learned to square corners until my brain ran at right angles. I learned to hold a rifle until it felt like a limb I'd forgotten at birth. Nights when the dorm buzzed with snores and muffled sobs, I whispered Dickinson lines into my pillow. Stormbird, you're not meant to stay grounded. Mom's words wrapped me like gauze. My calves ached, my palms blistered, but I didn't quit. I'd been practicing silence all my life. By fall semester, I'd survived the washouts. We lost one to homesickness so deep it looked like pneumonia, another to a knee that gave during log PT. The rest of us stayed, roots in stone. My grades didn't just hold, they sharpened. Calculus, chemistry, naval history, the geometry of ships floating where steel had no business floating. I loved the logic of it. Order punished you only if you failed, not if you tried. Failure I could fix. Silence I could not. Parents' weekend came. Dad stayed home. Mom came in a robin's egg cardigan, hugging me until my ribs creaked. She listened to me explain chow calls, as if I were reading her poetry. "You've got your grandfather's walk," she said, meaning the man she'd loved and Dad had feared disappointing. Straight-backed, carrying something worth noticing. She handed me oatmeal cookies wrapped in wax paper. I hid them under my mattress and rationed them to the roommate who kept my secrets without asking. Dad sent nothing. No postcards, no clipped articles, nothing. His silence became its own curriculum. I mailed home photos of milestones, obstacle courses, rank insignia, faces smeared with rain and pride. No reply. Envelopes stacked like unanswered prayers, each one a reminder. Absence is still communication. Commissioning week arrived. The stadium swelled with families, anchors gleaming on white covers. I stood in a row of 100, waiting to throw mine high enough to scrape sky. When my name was called, the commission bar pressed against my chest felt like both victory and wound. Mom clapped until her palms went raw. Dad wasn't there. I knew it. But when the hats flew, I still scanned the crowd for his jawline. That night, adrenaline still hot, I called home. He answered on the third ring. Static filled the line like withheld breath. Dad, I said, voice too bright, because hope is stupid that way. I did it. I'm an officer now. He paused, then, you made your choice. The line went dead. Orders came fast. Okinawa. Logistics. Not glamorous, not front page. Paperwork that told men twice my size when to haul, where to stand, how to keep supply lines breathing. They expected me to falter. Some bet I wouldn't last a year. I lasted 5. I didn't bark. I fixed. When systems jammed, I filed new hinges. When someone rolled eyes at a female officer, I ran the next briefing so tight they couldn't breathe between slides. I didn't need to shout. The work shouted. Then came 2007, Somali coast. A recon run gone bad. Gunfire doesn't sound like movies. It sounds like teeth breaking in God's mouth. We crouched behind rusted containers, bullets chewing steel thin. One of ours went down, leg shredded, artery spilling. I dragged him 40 yards under fire, cinched a tourniquet with one hand while the other clamped bone and blood. By the time the medevac bird lifted, my uniform was soaked red, shrapnel lodged in my side. I refused the stretcher. I can walk, I said, and walked. They called me Iceback after that, said I bled ice, not blood. The nickname never sat right. I wasn't cold. I was hot, with purpose. The Marine lived. Years later, he sent a Christmas card with a photo of his daughter. He'd named her Avery, after me. Recognition followed like a tide. Commendations. More responsibility. Respect that tasted earned. Still no word from home. One envelope I sent, containing a photo of the Distinguished Service Medal pinned on my chest, came back unopened. Return to sender stamped across my handwriting. I stopped mailing. Absence had become the only reply. By the time I pinned Rear Admiral stars, even the old brass called me ma'am, without irony. At Coronado, I rewrote training modules, cut injury rates, raised resilience, saved more lives than medals could count. Still no phone call from Dad. The work never stopped. Neither did the silence from home. By the time I wore 4 stars on my shoulders, the sea itself seemed to pause when I spoke. Full Admiral. The title was both crown and chain. Orders reached me before dawn. Voices on encrypted lines. Briefings that bled into ceremonies that bled into funerals. I accepted each weight, but never the silence that waited in my inbox, my mailbox, my childhood house that still held a man who couldn't dial a number. I received the promotion message alone, on a deck at sunrise. The ocean stretched wide as forgiveness, though I hadn't learned how to give it yet. No parade, no family, just sky, salt, and silence. Days later, a letter arrived in my father's handwriting. 5 words sharp as shrapnel. They're just making you a symbol. I burned it in the sink, then pressed my whites on the same board where I'd once ironed his. Tomorrow wasn't a promotion. It was my wedding. James was nothing like my father. He didn't salute. He didn't fold his socks into perfect rectangles or measure Saturdays by the mower lines. He was a civilian intelligence analyst, sharp as a knife, but with edges that cut only paper. We met at a Pentagon working group on cybersecurity. I thought his presentation sloppy. He thought mine bureaucratic. We argued in front of generals. That night, he rewrote his entire brief in my format. The next morning, he slid it across the table with a grin. You were right. That was how I knew. Not because he conceded, but because he listened. What struck me most wasn't his mind, though it moved fast and sure. It was his steadiness. He didn't flinch when calls yanked me out of bed at 0200. He didn't complain when I came home without words. He didn't treat my medals like artifacts. He looked at them, then at me, as if both were part of the same story. "You in uniform is the most honest thing I've ever seen," he said once. "Why would I want you in anything else?" His proposal was simple. No skywriting, no witnesses, just us on a pier in Norfolk, boots dangling above water that smelled of salt and diesel. He opened a box, a small diamond catching the last scrap of daylight. "Let me serve beside you," he said, "wherever that means." I didn't cry. I just said yes. Planning the wedding was harder than any deployment. James wanted quiet. My SEALs wanted spectacle. "We're not letting you walk alone," Chief Torres growled when I suggested a courthouse. So we compromised. The Naval Chapel. Formal, sacred, simple. I would wear full dress whites. James would wear a navy suit, no tux, no theatrics. A week before the ceremony, I sent my father a card. Not a plea, just completeness. "I'm getting married this Saturday. 1,300 hours. Naval Chapel. You're welcome to attend. I'll be in uniform." That was all. No RSVP. The night before, James and I observed tradition, separate quarters. He stayed with a friend. I stayed on base, pressing my whites until midnight. The brass winked under lamplight, 4 stars, like constellations. My hands shook, not from nerves, but from the weight of a life built alone and not alone. Morning broke clear, the kind of navy sky painters try to copy and fail. When I arrived at the chapel, I stopped short. Outside, a formation of SEALs stood waiting. Men I'd served with, bled with, buried brothers beside. No one had told them. They just came. "Non-negotiable," Torres said, grinning through scars. "You walked us through hell. We're walking you to something better." 15 minutes before the ceremony, I waited behind the heavy doors, Torres and Marcus Hill flanking me. My heart didn't race. I'd faced mortars. I'd faced silence. This was different, not harder. Then my phone buzzed. A number I hadn't saved, but would never forget. 5 words. "You're wearing a uniform. Disgraceful." I stared at it for a full minute. Not anger. Clarity. This was who he was, who he'd always been. Shame only works if you agree to wear it. I didn't anymore. I slipped the phone into my pocket, smoothed my cuffs, and nodded to Torres. The organ swelled. The doors opened. Light fractured through stained glass, splashing red and blue across polished wood. The chapel filled with 200 decorated warriors. In one unified motion, they rose to their feet. "Admiral on deck!" someone shouted. The echo cracked like thunder in holy air. My throat tightened, not from sadness, but from belonging. My father wasn't there, but my family was. James stood at the altar, eyes shimmering, hands folded at ease, the way he knew I preferred. Behind him, the chaplain I'd once deployed with held a binder but waited, reverent. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, thick with respect. We exchanged vows stripped of ornament. No for richer or poorer. We said, when orders come, we follow together. When they don't, we find purpose anyway. He promised never to ask me to dim. I promised to let him stand where I'd once stood alone. The chaplain pronounced us husband and wife. No eruption, just reverence. Then applause, thunderous and clean. Outside, we walked beneath an arch of crossed sabers, held by enlisted hands that knew the cost. It meant more that way. At the reception, one of my SEALs, voice like gravel, said, "We never stood for you because of your rank, ma'am. We stood because you never made us feel small." Then he hugged me, battlefield tight. I let myself accept it, not because I needed comfort, but because I'd earned it. Near midnight, when the cake was cut and the crowd thinned, James found me outside, watching the water. "Did you hear from him?" he asked gently. I nodded. "What did he say?" I told him. He was quiet a long time. "Do you believe it?" I looked at the gold trim on my sleeves, thought of 200 pairs of eyes earlier that day. "No," I said. Some reckonings happen in battle, some in silence, some at an altar. That night, mine happened between pity and salute. But reckonings don't end. They wait. They circle back. Months later, a photo arrived from my cousin Claire, taken outside the banquet hall that night of the helicopter. In the corner, half-shadowed, unmistakable posture. My father, standing in the parking lot, arms crossed, watching the bird lift into darkness. He hadn't saluted, not yet. Months blurred into missions, briefings, nights cut open by phone calls. Operation succeeded, failed, blurred again. I learned to live inside the rhythm of crises, but one evening, a courier placed an envelope in my hand. No return address. My name written in a script I'd once traced on permission slips. I knew before opening. I didn't enter because I didn't know how to sit among people who see in you what I refused to. I didn't salute, not because you didn't earn it, but because I no longer knew how to honor what I didn't understand. I was wrong. If you'll let me, I'd like to talk. No uniform, no protocol. Just a father trying to understand a daughter he never took the time to know. I read it 3 times. Didn't burn it. Didn't cry. Just let the words sit on my desk until silence felt heavier than reply. A week later, I wrote back, Arlington, Mom's headstone, Saturday, 1,000 hours. The morning was crisp, grass trimmed into military obedience. Silence here was absolute, not weapon, not wound. I arrived in uniform, not as provocation, but because it was truth. He arrived in civilian clothes that seemed too loose on a frame that time had shrunk. His hair was grayer, his walk slower, but the jawline was the same, stubborn as old orders. For a long moment we stood in front of the stone, names carved into permanence. My mother's name. The lilac perfume she used to wear seemed to cling to memory in the air. He broke first. You look like her, he said, voice catching. When you stand like that. We spoke grief before anything else. How she used to loosen the air when his rules made it tight. How her absence was louder than applause, sharper than silence. He admitted he mistook quiet for strength, orders for love. I admitted I trained myself not to need what he wouldn't give. Finally, slowly, he raised his hand. A salute. Crooked, late, imperfect, but real. My chest ached as if something locked had shifted. I returned it, not because he'd earned forgiveness, but because truth deserves witness. It landed heavier than any medal I'd ever pinned. We didn't hug. We didn't reconcile in a blaze of redemption. But when we walked away, we walked slower. Together, neither ahead nor behind. It was a beginning, fragile as glass, but a beginning. Weeks later, I stood at the Pentagon, floodlights hot on my shoulders. The Department of Defense had asked me to deliver the keynote at a leadership symposium. Brass lined the rows, notebooks open, waiting for strategies. I didn't tell them my story to shine medals. I told them about sailors who followed me into fire, instructors who broke under weight, teams that stood at my wedding, not out of protocol, but out of loyalty. Respect isn't inherited, I said, voice carrying steady. It isn't demanded. It's earned. By showing up, by standing when others shrink, by doing what's right when no one's watching. When the applause swelled, it wasn't routine, it was consent. Afterward, a young officer pressed another envelope into my hand. Cream cardstock. My name. Inside, his script again. I watched your speech. You built a life not to prove me wrong, but to save lives. I see that now. I hope I haven't missed my chance to stand beside you, even in a small way. Dad. I let the card rest in my lap a long time. Legacy doesn't arrive neat. It arrives late, bent, uncertain, but still breathing. I didn't answer right away. I carried his letter folded in the pocket of my uniform jacket like a live wire, unsure whether it would burn me or light something I hadn't dared hope for. Weeks passed. Then I invited him, not to a ceremony, not to a stage, but to a lecture I was giving to midshipmen at Annapolis. No fanfare, no introduction, just a seat in the back if he chose to take it. When I walked on stage, I scanned the rows, cadets in sharp whites, pens ready, and at the far back, a gray figure sat still, hands folded over a cap. He didn't wear his old jacket. He didn't need to. He was just a man, stripped of rank, stripped of armor, trying to listen. I spoke about failure, about the night I failed my first mile time and cried into a towel, and how 2 seconds can change a life. I spoke about silence, how it can wound deeper than shrapnel, and how leadership is often just noticing who needs shade before the parade starts. I watched cadets lean in, and I saw him lean too, shoulders softening. Afterward, he waited until the crowd thinned. He approached slowly, cap in hand, eyes shining the way I remembered only from photographs. His voice was rough but steady. "I'm proud of you," he said, then quieter, as if the words themselves were fragile. "I'm sorry it took me so long." I nodded, not because it fixed years, but because it started something. That night, James asked, "Are you happy with how it turned out?" I thought of the chapel, of 200 warriors rising to their feet. I thought of the banquet hall chandeliers trembling as a SEAL captain called me admiral. I thought of Arlington, where a crooked salute bridged a gulf I thought permanent. "I'm satisfied," I said, not because suffering vanished, but because real change had happened. Months later, I returned to a training base I hadn't visited in years. Names on the roster blurred until one froze me: Corporal Avery Patterson, the girl named after me. She shook my hand, eyes bright. "My dad told me you saved him," she said. "I wanted to serve like that." Legacy, not blood, choice. On the anniversary of my wedding, I stood again in whites, this time accepting the Department of Defense's Excellence in Ethical Command Award. James sat in the front row, smiling like truth itself was enough, and in the far corner, my father rose with everyone else. His salute was steady this time. I realized then, revenge isn't always about breaking what broke you. Sometimes it's about standing tall until they have to look up. Sometimes justice is recognition, late but undeniable. So if you're listening, ask yourself, who stood for you when others didn't? When did you turn humiliation into strength? Leave your story, share it, because reckonings aren't just personal, they're contagious. We rise when we rise together.